Hey Jackson, and anybody else that could be home on isolation or quarantine. Hope you're doing well, but I think this was for Jackson right now is who I'm thinking I'm reaching out to. So I believe you were doing a great job keeping up before you were told you had to stay home. And I don't know if you have a Windows-based machine that you can log in from home to do this. Or to download Multisim, but I did email out and post, I guess, on Google Classroom instructions for how to install Multisim at home if you have a Windows-based machine, because I think you do. If not, you can make an account for Multisim Live, which I also included those instructions when I emailed and posted in Classroom. But my preference would be to get Multisim, the actual program, if it were me. And if you really are doing well keeping up, you could do it in both. Unfortunately, you can't open one and the other, but if you did it in both, maybe there's a benefit of having like the online version. It's kind of a simplified version, or just kind of being able to, with some of these simpler things at this point in the year, like kind of get a feel for how the two work. All right, so anyway, little things. As we brought these on, remember in your notebook at the front in the blue, you can look up where to find things. Which we're looking up is where to place component in this menu. It'll tell you the group, like sources, power sources, and then like DC power, or down here VCC, a lot of these use. And then ground, or digital ground for us. Okay. The switch, I think, was under basic. Yep. And we used a single pole double throw. Although mine's been rotated. So once you bring those on, hitting Control R will rotate for you. Once you bring things on too, like the switch, I can double click or right click and choose properties. And you can get in here to where you can change a label. I don't have a label. I can actually change the display settings. So from sheet visibility to specific visibility settings, which we've turned everything off except values. And then the value is actually the key that we're going to use to toggle. So I can click on the switch manually, but you can also program a key on your keyboard to toggle that switch. Okay, so now if I hit X on the keyboard, it toggles that. And of course, any other switch that also has been given the X key. Right? These are indicator probes. And those as well, I've just changed the label. Okay. So it's not a special probe because it has the X or Z or VCQ. All right, so this one just had a single ground and power to one switch. And basically this probe is going to let us know this wire coming out of the switch, right? Is it got 0 voltage? The ground is no volts, or does it have the 5 volts? And I need to have my simulator running so you can see that. Okay, there you go. So when I'm connected to voltage, the probe or indicator shows that I do. If I toggle that switch, it's now off. This gate right here, however, takes that signal and it does something to it. It logically has a rule that says, I'm going to take this input and make a change and interpret it with my logic. So this one is the inverter, which just basically gives you the opposite signal you'll learn. So when I have no volts coming in, the inverter spits out 5 volts. When I have 5 volts coming in, it spits out 0 volts. So logically, 5 volts is treated as a 1, and no volts is treated as a 0. So in our truth table, I would say when there's an input of 1, when X is 1, Z is 0. When X is 0, Z is 1. It just inverts it. It makes it the opposite. Okay. So once you build the second one, you can see we've got 2 switches, so we can have 2 inputs to our logic gate. So in each input, they don't have to be the same. One can have power, can be a 1, and one can have a 0, can be an off. So right now I've got voltage coming here into the first input, and I've got this switch connected to ground, so that's 0. So then I can, and these probes are just visually helping you, instead of having to look at the switch and interpret, these are here to let you interpret, on is a 1, off is a 0, output is a 0. So I have a 1, 0, giving me a 0. So toggling my switches, I can test my different combinations. 0, 0 gives a 0. 0, 1 gives me a 0. And the last combination is 1, 1 gives me a 1. So interpreting that to mean, excuse the announcements. Picture day. And actually, you probably are getting emails and stuff, Jackson. You can come in for pictures. They have just go either call the office or look at your email. Pretty sure there were instructions about if you're on quarantine, a way that you guys can still get your pictures. So maybe look into that so that you're in the yearbook. All right, so this is an AND. So the only way for the output to be a 1, kind of like a true, is for both of these to be 1s. So it takes 1 and 1, both 1s, to get a 1. So and, I need both. Anyway, once you build that first one, you can highlight, Control-C to copy, and then you can Control-V to paste. What happened? Oh, I'm running the simulator. Sorry, so it didn't copy, and I want to undo. Where's my undo? My arrows. Why can't I find? Oh, right there. Okay. I don't know what text I pasted in there, but you can copy. Here, let me just use this space over here. You can paste, and then on the one component, because this is the only thing that's different from all these, you can right-click and choose Replace Components. It takes you kind of right to that component that you had. So we're looking for really another logic gate that's in the same group and family, so 74LS, and you'll just go find the other number. Now, in the instructions, they don't really tell you the D versus the N, but we used the N types in all of the activities I did in my training. So we're going to stick with that and say OK. And then you can choose one of those letters, and there you go. Now, I chose the inverter, which only has one input, so that wasn't a good illustration. So let's go grab, say, the 0, 0, N. That is a NAND gate. And you can see everything stays connected, and I can run the simulator. Okay, so I did that. Now, are you staying with me? Okay, hopefully you are. They have this flip-flop, they have you do, and then they have the clock timers, 3 of them. These are all the same, except one little capacitor. So make one, and then just paste, and change the value. That way you have them all together. All right, I want to focus in on the flip-flop. So if you're answering the questions in your workbook that guide kind of go along, I made a change. Okay, so this one here, they had you, and if you haven't gotten here yet, maybe kind of go build it, and this will make more sense. Okay, but they had you basically branch off of an output. These are outputs. Basically, you have a Q and always the opposite, so not Q. These are always, Q and not Q are always opposites, but they're your outputs of whatever else is happening in this flip-flop. They took the not Q and they wired it back into one of the inputs on this device called a flip-flop. And they attached a probe to it as well so we could see what it is at the moment. Okay, and since that's not Q, it's always going to be the same as this one. Right, that probe is really connected really to the same wire as that one. But it's an input. And so you don't have control in the ability to play around with what this can be. It's always kind of stuck being the opposite of Q. And I feel like that doesn't do justice in understanding what this data in really does. So what I've done is I've modified this. I no longer tied into not Q and brought that around to the data. I brought my own wire into data that's coming off of its own switch. And really I could have used the same power and ground down here. I didn't need these two. So maybe let's modify that. Okay, same thing. So I've got power and ground to pick up. But I wanted to have manual control of this value. And I felt like this makes, to me, they didn't do this in training. And I just felt like this would make so much more sense. Okay, so as you answer the questions, I think it's like E, F, and G. So I don't have the workbook in front of me, but I'm thinking it's like G. Really, you're trying to write out and summarize like what is going on here. And so let me just toggle. I've got two switches, T and D. So T is simulating, we're manually controlling what's called a clock, something that's going to cycle high and low. Okay, so you see it turning on and off. Okay, well, as the clock cycles, nothing's changing. Right? Not on that one. Now on the other one, though, it did. So one of the things they wanted you to notice, so make sure you do have it here, is kind of when it changes. So right now, it's on Q. Q is 1. When I change and go to the switch, go to power off, I had no change. When I hit T again, it changed. So when I powered on, it changed. Powered off, no change. Power on, change. Power off, no change. Okay? So we say that this device is active high because it triggered a change when we went from low to high. Going from high to low, there's no change. But going from low to high, there is. Okay? Now, my other one didn't change, right? That's because, okay, what happens for the change is that this D is like, we call it the data in. We are preloading what we want the output to be the next time it cycles low to high. So as long as this data in is set to 0, I'm already at 0, and I'm basically saying, hey, the next time you cycle low to high, I want you to be 0. Well, if it's already 0, it'll just stay 0. But let me switch this data into 1. Notice that did not change because it can only trigger a change in that transition from low to high. I was already high, and so it's just kind of already stuck there. When I make this go low, I have no change because, again, it's the transition from low to high that triggers the change. Now if I press T again, I'm going low to high. That should trigger the change. The change being that Q will now match the data in value, which is a 1. So since it's a 0, it should switch to match that. So I'm going to hit T, and there you go. It became a 1 to match. Now if I keep this data in on 1, this is already on 1. I've kind of preloaded a 1, but I'm not really requesting a change. And now if I cycle T, low to high, you can see that it didn't change. So what does the clock is a signal that is kind of usually either active low or active high. In this case, it's active high to help trigger a change. Data in is a place to preload what we want to happen on the next transition. Okay? And then Q is just always the opposite. Preset and clear, okay, those are also kind of active low or active high things. Those are ways to kind of override the data in or whatever the clock and just kind of like clear something. So we'll worry about that later. But just think of those as resets almost. And so what happened here is because, whatever Q is, not Q is the opposite. So they're constantly preloading the other value so that it will change on the next time, right? So Q is something, not Q is the opposite. So whatever we have, we're preloading the opposite for the next cycle, low to high. So I hope that makes sense. Really, if you feel like you can understand that, and then you could explain what I just explained in your own words, you're doing great at this point in time. You would be doing a lot better than I was when I took my training this summer, because I didn't understand it that well yet. I kind of had to. This kind of came up later in the course, and why they didn't present it in this manner at that point in time, I don't know, because I felt like I left this with still a little bit of confusion on what the data in thing really did, because we never got to see it controlled manually. So I hope that helps. The timer down here, the clock signals are pretty easy. I will tell you that we're going to use a chip that is a timer that can create its own triggering or oscillating from ones to zeros as our input to the clock later, so that we don't have to manually do that. So also thinking ahead, you can think how we can take one of these and make it feed into our clock signal, and we don't need a person to sit here and cycle low, high, low, high, low, high, right? We've got a timer doing it for us. And then the frequency of that timer we can control, right, based on these values, resistors, capacitors.